In this conversation, what I really want to do is think about that senior leader and executive who is stepping into that role for the first time, whether it's a VP, SVP, C-suite level, and get into the nitty-gritty of it from
Okay.
your perspective, because I think we hear it and we make a lot of assumptions about what it means. But if you're behind the scenes working with these individuals, I
Yep.
was going to say characters for some reason, but characters in some sense, what does that actually look like? And so the first question I have is what describe to me, is there any nuance in the people that you work with at this level? Could they be any size company, any industry,
Yep.
or do you really hone in? And if so, why?
Yep. The broad answer is no, I don't majorly hone in, and I think that's because to me the themes that emerge are pretty consistent, or the coaching tools I can bring to the table are of universal value. So I personally have not really discriminated against who I will see. You're right in terms of that level of stepping up is really where I focus, but they might be at a multi-billion-dollar tech company. They might be a really successful CFO who's trying to start their retirement and be a nonprofit director for the first time. It might be someone who's brought in as a fixer for a family portfolio in a really struggling business. So the concept of this high stakes transition, there's plenty of variety, which I personally find exciting.
I'm curious too, just the phrase that you used of these are high stakes transitions. And so when I hear words like high stakes, you've said before, it can be like a make or break role for somebody's career. They're stepping into that senior level position, sometimes a multi-billion dollar company. I run hot as an anxious person, so there's a little bit of, projecting here, but to me, that starts to escalate my feelings of stress and
Yeah.
anxiety and pressure.
Yep.
I- Is that happening for your clients too? And do you also experience that in the coaching journey that like, are you carrying some of that weight for them or like, how do you work that out?
Mm. I think humor is a great solution in coaching to that for both parties' benefit. Yes, the dollar signs may be overwhelming at times, or thinking about, gosh, I technically have 1,200 people reporting to me, or this business is supposed to help future generations of a family survive. People feel a great deal of expectation and weight on their shoulders. I think in terms of the temperature and how it shows up in coaching, it's really that I'm a place to release some of that. When they are so busy, when they feel like the microscope is on them, everything is being dissected. Coaching is this place where none of that is going on in a critical or analytical way about them as a person. So I am here to help accelerate or challenge ideas and how they're thinking about a business problem or how they show up. But I am not here to evaluate them. And I think that is pretty liberating to know and comforting when they do feel like otherwise there is potentially, quote, no place to go. And as I mentioned, I think humor is a great tool for that. We're all people at the end of the day. We can all reduce these problems and challenges down to very digestible metaphors or stories or past experiences that I think can help people who otherwise feel very stuck or overwhelmed to organically find like the path forward that works for them. And that's a big part of coaching for me is I don't want to stay in the theory around what leadership style works in this situation when I'm faced with X personalities on the board and Y dynamic with the CEO. We can't stay in this hypothetical churn, we need to get very tactical.
And I'm curious too, before this conversation, you threw at me like a bunch of statistics. I was like, oh, I have them here. I should look for them. But some of them around how big the cost is, how impactful the decision is for a company to think about who is the CEO and how are they going to transition. I met with a coach in New York City when I was there last week who does assessment, and she was telling me how many years sometimes they are planning for the succession of a CEO to really think who is going to be able to step into this.
Yep.
So from the clients that you work with, are they often maybe in that process where they're being considered to step into C-suite, or could it even be over the course of several years, or it's coming up for them more rapidly on their own? Does that make sense?
Yeah. So you're right, and I'll come back to some of the data points in a minute because I do think it's shocking, and the stakes are high, and the dollars being spent are real, and the impact is just unbelievable. But in terms of my clients, I think my ideal, and frankly, what I'm seeing more of these days, are people who are in that waiting pool. So they may be a VP who rose the ranks pretty quickly. They're sitting at SVP, pretty cushy right now, and they know that they are one of three in contention for being named to the next C-suite team. And they may come and engage me a couple months into their SVP journey, pretty aware that some things are working and some things are not. And if their goal is really to stay at that company or be to go elsewhere in a similarly advantageous upward track, that they need to be focused on how they spend their time and the nuance, right, of the role. And so that is generally how I start working with people. They'll say, hey, coaching is probably a long-term play for me. Let's see if we're the right dynamic. Generally, people I work with, we start at 6 months. Some folks will immediately jump into a retainer, meaning we're working together as often as they want for a year, 14 months. But that is where a lot of folks really aiming for the top end up is that, hey, Katie is part and parcel to who I am as an executive, and we're a team. And I get that journey end to end with people, which is really rewarding, and it becomes a friendship and it becomes a real partnership. But yes, the statistics also are crazy, right? I think the overall global spend on leadership development is something like 370-ish billion with a B a year. And executives are eating up more than 30% of that spend when they're like, what, 5% of the technical leadership in the workforce globally. So their intentionality and their desire to have partners is, I think, really evident in terms of the money being spent. Whether it's well spent or not is a whole other conversation. But the focus is there, both from the individual leaders and the businesses, to make sure people are primed to deliver, that they're also growing, and that the companies are getting what they need.
When you heard some of those statistics, like how big the market is, $370 billion with a B, and how much money is being spent at the executive level, I don't know, what comes up for you when you hear numbers like that about the work that you're doing?
I do think, honestly, it's a little concerning in the sense that I truly wonder how much of that 370 billion is attached to quality ROI. So for me, I would imagine a percentage of that is being thrown to triage a situation, right? Where a company already knows this is not a good mutual fit. The executive cannot operate day to day in the way we need to in terms of the scope of their role. I don't know how much of that can actually be salvaged. So that's one way I think some of that money is being spent, and I question that value. I also think there's a ton of snake oil salesmen out there too that are peddling programs and experiences and cohorts and communities that just make people feel good, but it doesn't equip them to be more effective and successful. And I think my challenge to any potential leader looking to work with a coach is that until you can get clear enough on what do you mean by being effective in this role and what is success for yourself in the business, you probably should keep your pocketbook tucked away. I think if you can't have that specificity and ability to define an outcome, you're probably going to get bamboozled and you might not be better off in terms of your own capabilities or what you deliver at the company.
Hmm.
Shooting myself in the foot.
Yeah, good advice, good advice, good advice. Well, then what comes up for me is I'm thinking, okay, what's going on for people that they come to the table and like they don't know how to define what effectiveness is or what success is. Is that a problem internally, or it's that they don't have an understanding of the organization, or there isn't alignment between the two, or
Yeah. I think part of it culturally in the past, call it 15 years, is a bit of just business jargon and consultancies taking over, and we talk at each other and we think we're saying the same things, but we probably mean a whole host, again, like nuance actually really matters. And not enough people are slowing down to really dissect that, not only from a self-awareness perspective of capabilities as a leader, but also the context of the business problems they're solving. People just aren't slowing down enough. And I think we talked about this earlier around, hey, what are some of the obstacles I see with clients? And that's a huge one, is folks just don't know how to acclimate and really assess thoroughly before jumping to solutioning. So that's, I guess, one thing I would really call out.
Yeah, yeah. Maybe walk me through that. What are, like, hit me with 2 or 3 of the top obstacles that you see coming up for people.
Yeah, I think one of them is really just about taking time to craft a solution and an answer. So many companies even assume when they pick somebody for a high stakes leadership role that by picking X person, we've already solved our problem because they've done this before or we've seen them deliver elsewhere. And while I think that can give confidence to the choice you've made, I think it's overlooking a lot of the nuance that can be at play. So one huge obstacle is assuming you've got the solution and the answer before you've even really settled into the chair. And this mostly, I think, comes up in terms of setting a vision and direction before you've really even ensured, am I solving the right problem? Is this really the root cause of what we're seeing? There's a lot of solving for the symptom that happens. And then, oh, what do you know? The leader's not effective. That's because we were not focused on the right things. So that's huge. And I see that at every company, at every level, in every industry. The second piece, very closely tied to that, is slowing down. So on the one hand, so many of these companies were just busy all the time and probably wasting time and woefully tied to meetings and back-to-back calendar Tetris. And we're moving really fast, but we're not really doing anything. And then you think about these companies that take 12 and 18 months to implement a strategic change. And that's just like such a dichotomy to me and so ridiculous. But again, we're slowing down and speeding up for the wrong things. For a senior leader in transition, when I say slow down, have conversations, build trust, get curious, second guess your ideas, engage another perspective, broaden your circle of trust for crafting a strategy. People don't slow down enough to do any of those things.
And why do you think that is? Do you
I think there is this just like there is this, I think, unhealthy myth that we can bust that if you're in the C-suite or SVP level, your life is really lonely, you're an island, figure it out by yourself. Not true and not a good thing to perpetuate. So too is this idea that I show up on day 0, I've solved it. So this whole focus on quick wins and getting some points on the board and delivering and all these other metaphors we use all the time, it's just really unhealthy. And it's unhealthy because it creates such stress and demand on these leaders. And it's also unhealthy because these businesses are churning around solving things that aren't the right problem. And I think those two myths together are just a disaster for people's careers and for the efficacy of companies, let alone their huge L&D spend.
Yeah, yeah. I was wondering if partially that's, and there's no one right answer here, but if ego is sometimes driving that, or lack of awareness of I don't even know how to slow down, get curious, ask questions, or it's driven by I might know how, but I feel a pressure to deliver on some stakeholder returns. And so like I know I should be slowing down. I also feel the pressure that like I need to be speeding up and delivering it, like all of that together.
I think it is all of that together. And that's the exciting thing about coaching in this space is the nuance for what's that percentage breakdown for each leader I may encounter is really different. Some may be very ego driven, and that's clearly what's at play, and others it might be something entirely different. But there's a whole host of causes that I think lead to these two dangerous ways of operating.
Yeah, yeah. This may be an odd question, but it's coming up for me, so I'm going to ask it. What's coming up for me is I'm thinking about when senior leaders and executives sometimes come to me for thinking about career transition in the sense of job searching. Like, what's the tactics of doing it? And sometimes the focus really is on that, not to say you can't do that or you never do that. I know that's part of your work. But also there's this piece of thinking, it's like developing the right skills to have the self-awareness to do the transition and have the transition well. And so my question might be a little cobbled together, but my question is like, when do you think is the appropriate time for somebody to start thinking at this higher level of the how do I make an effective transition and the skills that are necessary in that versus how do I make an effective transition by like how do I land the thing that I want? Does that make sense? The like the difference between those two?
Yep. You may not like my cop out of an answer here, but I actually think the more important piece and the timing is the question itself. And I think the way you framed it is the way people should be thinking about it, that not everyone is, and certainly most companies haven't caught up with, and that is skills. So we are really still in such a role-based approach for how we hire. X here means X here. It doesn't. And so many leaders probably either have a false sense of confidence or inferiority because a title does or doesn't match up, as opposed to thinking through what are the skills and competencies I'm leveraging in my role right now that I love, that are hard for me, that I want more of. And based on where I want to go, how do I need to be showing up in that role, right? How do I kind of balance these different buckets when we think about skills and behaviors and capabilities? And so I would say, firstly, that's most critical is shift how you're thinking about it. Go in that direction, get that specific. Because also in part, it may open you up to a host of other roles you hadn't thought about that really do deliver on your vision and amplify your brand. But to your question around the timing, for me at least, I think it is when you're clear on your goal. So that might be in anticipation of a promotion, and that might be once they have said, hey, we would like you to take on this role, please say yes, and they come find me a couple months later. I think as long as the client is clear on their trajectory and what success looks like on their terms, I'm happy to dig on that transition. For some people, that might be a couple months or even a year ahead of an anticipated succession plan. And for others, it might be 6 weeks in.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's a big difference. And
Yeah. Yes.
actually, what was driving the question is so often, I think on the more tactical job search side, often where I'm working with clients, they'll come in and they wait until they get to a point where they're desperate or being more reactive and they see what's involved to do it right, what's involved to do it intentionally, what's involved to land exactly what they want versus what they feel like they have to take. And one of the most common things that people say is, I wish I would have started this much sooner. And or I wish that like through when I had a job, I had been proactively taking the steps to build my brand, to build my network, to understand the vision. I wish I had done all of that sooner and been more intentional about it. So that was driving the question for this work too, of this, to me, that feels so tactical and so simple in a sense. So I'm just moving from one job to another, but this, it's like I'm stepping into a senior leader role, C-suite of a multi-billion dollar company, waiting until the point where you're being really reactive, or you're just trying to build your skill set and your competencies like at the moment or 6 weeks into the job like that. Yeah, again, that brings up a lot of pressure for me. So curious, optimal timing.
I think that flip of the switch in terms of pressure for my clients manifests at different points. And some people may really thrive already being in the role and feeling like they've got their sea legs before they bring in a partner. And others may be maybe more like you and I that are very much so in the prior planning bucket. And so they are thinking 18 months ahead, 2 years out. But I think what's true in both of those cases, regardless of that timeline, is they are very clear on their definition of success. And that to me is like the really important piece to have figured out, is to know what we're aiming towards. And then we can certainly back into the skill refinement, etc. And some of this work you truly can't do until you're in it. We can game some of this out, but it'd probably be a waste of your time, right? I want our work to have very like real time, profound implications for people. And so sometimes that's far out, and others that's when the plaque's going up on the door.
Yeah, I got it. You had mentioned to me prior to this call that you feel really excited about the level of investment that people are making in their personal growth or professional growth, especially at this level.
Yeah.
And sometimes I think we hear that, but it's, what does that mean? There's such a broad range of coaches and prices and who's paying for it. And so from your perspective of somebody who's showing up at the level that you work at, and they're saying, I really want to commit to a high level of growth, what does that mean? Is that an amount of time that they're spending with you? Is that an amount of money that they're spending with you? Is that an amount of work that they're doing?
So I'll tackle all of those in order. In terms of time, my clients are usually willing to commit to a minimum of 6 months of coaching. So I work with folks in two ways. It's the 6 month engagement model, or it's a longer term retainer, and then we are meeting as frequently as they want. But they have enough clear line of sight to say that I can focus on myself and it would behoove me to do so for the next 6 months. That's the minimum. The price points, I think we continue to see on the coasts some really crazy numbers, in my opinion, around what I would say, is there enough ROI in that, even if your company's writing the check? In terms of your last piece there around what they have to put into it, I'm not a fan of busy work. I'm not a fan of stuff just to add to your inbox. So most of our work does happen live in our sessions. If there is some type of tool or framework that I think will help a client get to an answer faster or make for a more robust coaching session, I would send that ahead of time. But really, they're looking to focus that 60 minutes with me at a time and focus on that conversation and really what situation they're encountering in the here and now. That being said, if any client leaves a session with me and they can't readily say, here are my insights, this is the action I'm taking, this is the experiment I am undertaking, this is what's different behaviorally, I have not done my job. So I very much so encourage practical application and getting tactical and not staying in the swirl of theory and exploration too long, because I think that honestly just does hold people back from growth.
Yeah, it's helpful. And I think there's a wide world of coaching versus advising versus consulting. And so I think it's helpful to get a sense of how many hours per week am I spending with somebody, or what does it look like to show up and do this work? And I think that for each coach, that's different. For every context, it's different. And so that's helpful.
Sure, absolutely.
Let's see, two last questions for you, rapid fire. One is, what is the most common piece of advice or feedback that you give to clients where it's like almost everybody who comes to the table? I feel like I'm repeating this over and over again.
Oh gosh, what's the why behind that decision?
Good one. Okay. And then as we get ready to close out the year, we're like just barreling towards it. We're so very close. Who are you looking forward to working with? If you could bring on another client, if you had one spot left on your roster, which I know you only have a couple, who would you really love to work with kind of to close out this year and maybe coming into 2025?
This year has been really interesting to work with senior leaders who have grown up in businesses. So they have really climbed the ranks and they are entering C-suite territory at a time where their company is really struggling and a lot of sort of disruption or transformation is demanded by the time. And that's been a really exciting, I think, place to work. So somebody that has been brought up by the business, they really know it. This is a culmination for them of their career, but also walking into a situation that absolutely will not end favorably if it's maintaining the status quo. So I think it does tie nicely back to something I talk about a lot around thriving through transitions, right? So you move into a role, fabulous, congrats, just maintain. I don't know, to me, that's not very exciting or inspirational. And I think I attract clients that also have the same reaction of, okay, I've made it, and now let's just blow it out of the water even more. So that would be my answer.
Yeah, I love that. It sounds exciting, stressful and exciting. I'm like, okay, it's helping me get a picture of Katie and the level of capacity that you have for this work too, because that's a lot to hold. Like, I think we're always holding space for our clients. We don't have that many clients. And so we're like walking alongside that journey and knowing what's going on for them and like, where's the pressure valve? And so, yeah, it's cool that you have that level of capacity to hold that for people and walk in that journey. And not everybody has that.
Yeah, I think what I try and remind myself of, honestly, is like the multiplier effect almost. And that's probably a big piece of why I stepped into this full time, was that I can help that client that's in that pressure cooker. And we're getting a lot out of this partnership. I have a friend, I have a colleague along the way, which is beautiful. But I know that everything we're working on together just is billowing positively in all these different directions. And that's such an exciting thing to say you've been a part of, is yes, helping those business outcomes, yes, helping a culture change, helping a tactical transformation, helping a leadership team be more effective. There's probably so many others I could rattle off, but really the ripple effect of coaching and what you talk about in an hour over the course of 6 months has such incredible benefit to so many other people. So that's what helps keep the pressure valve from.
I love that. Well, thank you for sharing.